Hello and welcome to Beyond Bulimia. I'm Malise. In today's episode, I go into detail around my childhood. You'll find that someone who has bulimia as a coping mechanism will often have these themes in their childhood that help create a environment where that person needs to find escape or comfort or security, and they do this through the eating disorder. So please enjoy today's episode, and I may bring you insight or deeper understanding about the roots or origins of the bulimia in your life or a loved one's life. Enjoy the episode. My childhood is a beautiful reflection of why someone might develop a coping mechanism such as bulimia. Before I get into my childhood, let's just look very high level at bulimia for a second here. Now, bulimia is a way of one getting back control in some area of their life. It's a strategy for feeling better, which is what a coping mechanism is. And it quickly becomes an addiction. Now it becomes hardwired. And because of my training in NLP, what you can do is you can trace back the strategy, the process of any hardwired habit. And you can see how a trigger might create a thought pattern, which might create an action, which might create another action, and you get the idea. And this becomes hardwired. This is what a habit is. It's like a super highway. The first place a thought goes down, the path of least resistance, the easiest and smoothest way to go when you're triggered by something. It's a comfort. Food becomes a comfort, and it becomes a way of, as all coping mechanisms are, a way of numbing that feeling of feeling unsafe, the fear. So what on earth would create a fear in someone that they would create such an unhealthy coping mechanism, such as the binge purge cycle? Now, often it's about control. My upbringing reflects this, and so I'm going to share this with you now. A feeling that we do not have the self-autonomy developed to feel that we have our own identity. A loss, or even not even in the first place, a development of identity, or being able to choose our identity. And so, being one of 5 children in a household that was often chaotic, the first thing my parents did, and bear in mind when I talk about my parents, I'm not placing any blame or criticism on the way they did things. We are all doing the best we can with the knowledge, wisdom, and resources we have at the time. So this is an important lesson a bulimic needs to learn as they find out the origins of their coping mechanism. We must not place blame or point a finger at someone else, because that's giving away our responsibility. That is victim consciousness, and you are not going to find health, wholeness, and healing if you look for external reasons why you went through what you went through and why you're going through what you're going through, and then finish it there and go, well, my hands are cleaned of this issue. It's this fault, this person, this reason, etc. You get the idea. We must not go down that road. It might be tempting, but victim consciousness is not going to help the bulimic heal. I think on that note, when I talk about my parents, I understand they did the best they could. And you need to understand this too with your primary caregivers. When you're looking at the root of why you started bulimia, it's important that we see it from a higher level. And this is the first thing that I would like to share with you before I share my origin story here is everything in this life experience is here to serve us. I know that is very difficult for one to grasp or even want to believe. It's very easy for us to give away our power and externalize our problems and challenges in this life. So this is where spirituality comes into play. I'm going to introduce spirituality early on in the piece with this Bulimia series. But spirituality was the missing piece of the puzzle for me. Now, I was brought up in a religious household, but that wasn't spirituality for me. That was a dogmatic system of structure and control, which didn't work for me. Spirituality had to come later in the piece for me. It was after I developed self-autonomy, after I looked in to find out who I was, knowing thyself, a key part of this healing and integration. So I had to find out who I was in order to find out what spiritual beliefs I wanted to entrain with, and to then find out through direct experience whether they were true for me or not. So this is a very personal experience that we have to go through to find the higher picture for why we are here as adults and as humans. And if you haven't asked these fundamental questions, why am I here? What is my purpose for being here? Then I would encourage you to ask these questions, because until you do ask these fundamental existential questions about being a human, there's a part of you that's unconscious. And so I don't mean to go too deep straight away, but it is important that you begin to contemplate these things in your life. Why am I here? Because you need this piece, this spiritual part of life, to be able to heal and become whole, because the whole pie is spiritual, emotional, physical, and mental. It's not just physical and mental. Okay, so these big questions had to come into play for healing. So my spirituality have served me wonderfully in showing me that everything is here to serve me. So the parents that I had, the family that I were brought into, were all here for a specific reason, as my destiny, if you like, to help me shine up like a diamond as a soul having a human experience, to evolve and to become more whole in the bigger picture as pure loving awareness in a human body. And so when we start to look at life as everything is here to serve me, we start to see that we are no longer a victim. And even though that is a big theme with bulimia, we feel like a victim because of our early childhood, because we felt so out of control, because we felt alienated, because we felt like we didn't know who we were. We hid behind this identity of victim. And believe me when I say, you are not going to be able to move forward if you believe you are a victim, because that's externalizing the blame. So now that I've got that out of the way, and I'll be talking more about that later down the line, my early childhood was definitely one where I felt out of control. I didn't feel seen and heard. And that makes sense when there's 5 children, 2 adults, both having their own emotional, mental, physical difficulties and challenges, being humans and having a human experience, and then having 5 children. Of course, I'm not going to be able to feel seen and heard. There wasn't enough resources for me to get that. And so, as with any childhood where you don't feel seen and heard by someone, you begin to feel unsafe. Part of repressed emotions, the whole journey of repressing our emotions, has to involve a point where we are taught or socialized that bad emotions should not be shown or expressed. And when I say bad, I'm putting a judgment there that shouldn't be there. All emotions are just energy in motion coming through our physical body. we turn them into stories and they become problems. And then we judge ourselves as bad or good accordingly. And that's how we're socialized. We're brought up as little kids. We're told, don't be angry, don't be sad. We're punished, we're disciplined if we go down those emotional routes. And so we learn very quickly it's not okay to express these particular energies in our life. And so if you have bulimia, I'm sure if you look into your childhood, there would have been a theme there where you were not seen and heard for the full range of emotions that you had. Anger, sadness, guilt, frustration, shame, fear, anxiety. There's a whole lot. There's a whole gambit of negatively judged emotions. And so when we're not seen and heard, it just means that we can't be ourselves. We can't express everything we want to feel because some of it is deemed as bad. And so that's how I was brought up. And many of my peers. And it's just becoming a conscious parenting thing now, just now in this day and age. But certainly not back in 1979 when I was born, was it even talked about in general circles that children need to express their full range of emotions without judgment. And so this is a part of why we become blinded to who we are. We don't develop who we are. We don't get a chance. We start to bottle up energy within our bodies, and that becomes stuck, that becomes repressed. We become suppressed. And we want to please our parents. And this is the theme a lot of bulimics have, is we want to be loved and we want to feel safe. How do we do that? We do whatever we're told by our parents for fear of being abandoned or rejected by them, and to feel accepted and like we belong. We do what we're told. And that's where we do not develop self-autonomy. If your parents didn't have the time, the energy, the resources, the wisdom, or the knowledge, or the education, which most of our parents didn't, they weren't able to be there to see and hear us, to nurture our own unique traits and gifts and interests and curiosities. Instead, they socialized us to fit in. And so when I grew up with a family of five, all of us 5 siblings, we just survived. We didn't have the space to find out who we really were and develop our self-autonomy. So that's what enmeshment is. And so it's a feeling that you don't have control. And so if you're listening to this and you have bulimia, I'm sure you are relating to this. We didn't have control in our childhood. Now that further extended for me. And that was the religious part of my upbringing. I was brought up in a very dogmatic religious household for the first several years of my life until I was about age 14. And that was in a fundamentalist Pentecostal style church. And I, once again, I'm not blaming my parents, but they were very loyal to their religion and they wanted to follow the Bible, correctly, according to their interpretation of what the Bible meant. And for me, that meant that I was brought up with a very strict patriarchal household, highly disciplined, chores all day on the weekend, on a Saturday. I wasn't allowed to socialize with my peers from school unless they were of Christian household. I wasn't allowed to sleep over. I wasn't allowed to go to shopping centers unattended. And this was right up until, I was 13. And I wasn't allowed to do a lot of the things that my peers at school were doing. And remembering that I went to several schools. So I felt very out of control and ungrounded through this whole process, through the religion, through the moving schools. And then there was the other side of things, and this goes into, I'm going to talk about sexuality in another episode, but the highly kind of traditional roles of the women and the men. And so for me, being a woman, a female, I had to wear dresses to church, even though I wanted to wear pants. I've always been a bit of a tomboy. I wasn't allowed to wear makeup because that was vanity. I wasn't allowed to get my ears pierced. I had to keep my hair at a certain length, because otherwise that was vanity, having long hair. All of these things added to that feeling that I did not have a choice in my life. I could not find out who I was. I felt extremely restricted. So you can see how this would create me looking for a way to gain back some control. Now, there's the other piece. This is where a lot of bulimics have self-esteem issues. And for me, I always felt alienated. I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I was quirky. I was extremely shy as a little girl. In fact, in kindergarten and then in primary school, in prep in Melbourne, both times I was much of a loner as a child. I would go around and I would tease the other kids and provoke them, because I didn't know how to connect. I did not know how to emotionally connect to other children, to my peers. I thought if I provoked them, then I would get some sort of response. I wouldn't feel ignored, because I felt unseen and unheard at home. So I didn't know how to elicit a response from other people. So I did it in a very unhealthy way, and that was through trying to provoke them. I would get into fights in the playground. And then when it would come to things like group photography, like when they would get the class photo, I would run away in absolute panic, in fear. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't like to be herded together. I didn't know who that photographer was. And often you would see me in the arms of the teacher in tears. Now, I haven't fully unpacked what that was about, but I know that I had extreme fear and anxiety around other people. I did not know how to socially relate to my peers. I had no idea. My outlet was teasing and provoking and fighting and interrupting and isolating. I was a loner for the first few years. And so it made me feel alienated. I've always felt like I didn't belong. And then this religion that I was brought into, where I was told that I was, if I chose this Jesus in my heart, then I would be saved from all the rest of the sinners that were going to hell. And so I would go to school, a secular mainstream school, and I would think that there must be something different about me, because I was I was going to heaven and they were probably going to hell because they didn't go to church, because they swore, because they spat on the ground, because, I had no idea. I was brought up with this very black and white system of control as to why I was a human being, how I was a sinner, and how I would be chosen one if I went a certain way, if I said certain things, if I prayed in a certain way. I didn't understand the nuances or the allegories of the Bible, which I see now, and what Jesus was saying, really saying. Because in a religious system, and I won't go into this because you have your own belief systems, but generally speaking, a religious system is about control. And it stops the individual from thinking for themselves. And so, yes, completely alienated in my childhood. And that created a painful self-consciousness, low self-worth, low self-value and esteem. I didn't feel I fit in. I was painfully self-conscious of what I looked like. And this is the point I want to go into here with bulimia. we start to blame the reason that we can't seem to feel confident or certain of ourselves or in control. We blame it on the way we look. And yes, a huge part of this is the way that we objectify women in our culture still. The way that, it was worse when I was in growing up. But it's getting better now. But there's still a lot of problems in our mainstream culture, in our media, in the way that women are portrayed. And so I would look at these women in the magazines, the teen magazines and on Neighbours and Home and Away. And I would go, oh, that's what I'm supposed to look like. That's how I become popular. That's how I learn to fit in. And, because I was painfully shy and I never fit in and I didn't like myself and I didn't see who I was with everyone. I didn't know who I was. And so I tried to find a solution. I was trying to problem solve. If I look like her, then I will fit in. That must be the missing piece here. In my young mind's logic, that's the conclusion I came to. So I started dieting. And when I was about 11 years old, when I started to, at first, without an education on and knowledge of food, I just knew that there was junk food and there was healthy food. And I was always brought up in a household with very healthy food. And we were treated to McDonald's once a week, which was always great. Loved that. I used to get my fish burger and strawberry milkshake. But otherwise, it was a very strict diet that we were given, powdered skim milk, veggies, simple foods. We didn't have a lot of money most of the time, especially when you've got a household of 7. So I saw junk food at school as a huge treat. We rarely had the tuck shop. We rarely had money for the tuck shop, which was the food from the canteen at school. But when we did, when Mum would give me some money and put it in a paper bag and we write the order and I would take it to school, I was so excited. I would get my meat pie and my jam-filled donut and my chocolate milk. And it was the most amazing treat for me. And I started to really enjoy that moment so much. That gave me great comfort, that taste of food. And now another side point here is that during children's birthday parties, when I was invited, I would stand at the food table, gorging on food because I was so painfully shy of the other kids. I didn't feel I fit in. I would go to what I felt most comfortable with, and that was food. I would just stand at the big party table that kids would have with the fairy bread and the sausage rolls and the little hot dogs and the cake and the lollies and the ice cream. And I would just stand there gorging. I would fill my body up to the point of agony. I remember my mum picking me up and I would come home and I was lying on the couch just going, oh, I was in pain. I didn't understand how to stop. This is another theme that I had later in life with drugs, with other substances, with alcohol. But for now, it was food because I was just a kid. And so, yeah, I didn't have a stop button. I was just looking for a way to feel better, to numb my feelings of social anxiety, which is a big theme in my life because I never felt like I belonged. I didn't have that feeling of connection with others. And so all of this, these coping mechanisms were overwhelming. So by age 11, when I started to decide that I was going to limit my food because I thought I was overweight, and I wasn't overweight, but I was I always had chubby cheeks. And the kids at school would tease me for my ears. They would stick out a little bit. I kind of cover them still today, although there is another story where I shaved my head later in life. That was very liberating. But for most of my life, I was painfully self-conscious about my looks. I had a very round face And I would try and lose weight. And so this was the beginning for the bulimic journey, because bulimia is about food and it's about weight loss initially. It's about controlling food so that we can lose weight. And so age 11, I started to eat only healthy food, but I didn't understand what healthy food was, because I would eat a whole bag of sultanas, calling them healthy, and then I started to put on all this weight. Now you can imagine how many calories and fat are in a bag of sultanas. Woo! And you can imagine how much problems I had with my digestive system after a bag of very laxative inducing sultanas. So I was very confused, and I was wreaking havoc on my body before I started bulimia. Now I realized and discovered a life-changing moment in my life. When I was 13, I discovered calories. And my mom had a little calorie book and a little food weigher. And I got heavily into weighing my food and counting my calories. Now, another side note here, my mom always dieted. She was always on a diet. Now, again, I'm not pointing fingers here. I'm just showing you how the childhood of a bulimic can shape why we move into this as a coping mechanism. Now, I watched my mum, who had issues with self-esteem herself and body image. I watched her yo-yo diet my entire childhood. Went from one diet to the next. And that's how I learned how to treat food. I saw food as this enemy and this comfort, because that's the way mum looked at food. Bad food's good food. No, I can't eat that today. Yes, I'm going to eat a lot of that today. So it's very, yo-yo dieting is very black and white. It's very unbalanced. What comes up must come down. The law of rhythm, the Hermetic principle, which I will talk about throughout this series, Hermeticism, has greatly helped me understand myself. But if you're going to do anything extreme, it's going to swing back in the extreme opposite to balance out. That's the law of polarity, like extreme, the law of rhythm, polarity, extreme. So we have to learn balance. We have to be able to allow the pendulum to come right into the middle and create an equilibrium in our lives, in every area of our lives. And so I did not understand balance. I wasn't demonstrated balance as a child. It was, everything was extreme. My dad's discipline, my mum's yo-yo dieting, the religious system I was brought into, it was all extreme. Everything was extreme. There was no balance in a lot of areas. And so I didn't learn balance. And I did the same thing when I started food, calorie counting and weighing food. I lost a whole lot of weight all of a sudden. Now, I don't need to tell you how satisfying that is as a bulimic. When I first started losing weight, I suddenly felt in control for the first time in my life. Oh, what a feeling. I can feel it again now in my body. That energy of feeling in control is so satisfying. It fires up the neural peptides in the brain. It feels good. And that's how we create an addiction, my friends. Okay? So the power I felt in that moment, where I saw in the mirror, where I saw on the scales that I was in control, was addictive. And that is the mechanism of addiction in bulimia here, right there. You feel in control. Finally, in your life, you've developed some sense of feeling you have control. And you never want to let that go again. Now, there are many different eating disorders, and my series is specifically about bulimia. So I'm specifically talking about the binge purge cycle, but it all starts the same with the eating disorders. It's an addiction. Our brain gets excited and fires up and sends those neural peptides that make you feel good, the brain chemicals that make you feel good. You become addicted to it. You create new neural pathways. They become the path of least resistance. They become the strategy that your mind uses as coping mechanism. And it's very difficult to change that once it's set in place. And it becomes reinforced and reinforced after years and years and years of this same strategy. It's just a superhighway. It's just the way you think. It's an unconscious program running. 95% of our mind, our thoughts, are subconscious thoughts. They're the same thoughts from the day before. They require no new conscious effort. And so that's why the process of healing requires becoming conscious. And that's going to be a big theme of this series. If you want to find healing, you have to become conscious. And that's why if you do start to study neuro-linguistic programming, I would highly recommend it for someone with bulimia. How the mind creates neural pathways that creates habits and addictions, and how you can get back control by becoming conscious, by shedding light on that process, that strategy that you've been using all this time that's creating havoc in your life now. So age 13, I start losing a whole lot of weight. I start feeling really good about myself. My confidence rises. I start to talk to boys. I start to get really, I feel like I socially fit in now. I've got a group of friends, but unfortunately I'm still moved around schools. So I still had this issue with, when you have social anxiety and you already have an issue with fitting in and your place in things and how to connect with others, when you're uprooted constantly, you just get to this point where you give up and you just get really good at masking. What is masking? Masking is where you pretend to be like everyone else. And a lot of people who mask don't realize that other people don't need to mask in the same situations. And I didn't realize this. I thought everyone thought like I did, but at the same time, I felt alienated. So there's your paradox. But I was masking, and I masked my whole life socially, trying to fit in like everybody else. And so those painful teen years for me were very difficult. This is where I truly went into starvation periods. Like before I actually developed bulimia or even discovered I could throw up my food, I would starve myself. Probably the longest was 10 days. So I got pretty skinny there. But if anyone's done that watching this, we know that you become extremely weak. You can't focus. You can't even sleep. If you don't have enough calories in your system, you need calories to sleep. And so it's extremely disorientating to go through those periods of starvation. And it's so lonely. This whole thing is so lonely because you really believe, you tell yourself no one will understand. You tell yourself it's extremely shameful what you're doing. And it just adds to that alienation that you already have in your life. And so all of this is very hidden behavior. And I'm going to do a whole episode on hiding and the ways we hide this behavior, the ways we lie, the ways we create a new life where it has mechanisms for hiding and lying built in. But yes, through my teens, I got skinny. And I really enjoyed that power. And then, moving out, I finished high school age 17. 16, sorry, and I was quite young because I moved up from Melbourne and to the Sunshine Coast. And I finished high school at Maroochydore High, and I decided to go to uni. And now I had no idea who I was. I had not developed who I was. I was pressured in school to get really good results. And I was pressured to do subjects I wasn't even interested in. And because I thought, if I don't know what I'm going to do, then I better keep all doors open. So I felt this external pressure that I had to study maths and chemistry and biology, and I had no interest in these subjects. And this is another theme for bulimics. We don't tend to know ourselves. So we can get lost in trajectories of other people's timelines. We can entrain with other people's value systems. Enmeshment again. Enmeshment. We don't develop self-autonomy. So we do what other people are doing and assume that's what we want. And that's how masking comes in play. We just put up with it. We don't know any better. So I tried to choose careers that other people were choosing. I had no interest in those things. My interests were art. I'm extremely creative artistically in painting, writing, the mind, counseling, and workshops and speaking. And I kind of didn't have a cookie cutter career option there for me when I was in my teens. And so I was very confused. Very confused. And that's, as a side note, I want to mention here is that we can't try and fit into someone else's idea of career. So if you're a young person watching this, develop your own trajectory. Forget about what everyone's pressuring you to do. And there's no rush. When you go out of school, there's no rush to go into university. And this is something that I know firsthand because I changed my degree 4 times before I settled on something that was very general, a Bachelor of Creative Industries. And I still don't know what that was today. It's just this random bunch of art subjects to put together. So you can see I had this scattered energy because I had no self-autonomy. And this is such a big thing for me in my life. I tried to fit in. I just tried to fit in. I was a square peg in a round hole everywhere I went. And it was exhausting because I would come up against a wall and I would give up. So I really just wanted in this episode to talk about some of my origin story with bulimia. I want you to see that you're not alone in how we can get lost in who we are and not develop a sound self-identity. We start to think that who we are is other people's values and society's values. And what are values? A value is what is most important to you. And often, still today, most adults have never stopped to question what are their values? What is your values? Are they really yours? Or are they what society or your parents have told you are important in your life? No, not everyone is interested in having a couple children, getting married, having a mortgage, and building themselves up in their career to CEO and retiring. That's just a generic cookie cutter value system. It's very important. It's vital that you find out what's important to you. What is your value system? So before I finish this episode, I'm going to leave you with a very beautiful and simple technique for finding out who you are a little bit more. And that is close your eyes, take a big deep breath, put your hands on your heart, and simply ask yourself, ask your heart. This is about your heart, not your head. What is the most important thing to me in my life? An answer. And it should come from your heart. It's going to be nothing to do with what you're told by others is important. It could be completely unconventional. It could go against everything that you've been brought up is true, or you've been brought up has to be true. And then if you want to find out your next 2 values, just simply ask, what is the most important thing to me after that? And then after that. And then you have 3 values. You have your top 3 values elicited, and write them down. And you'll find that every choice in your life, everything that motivates you and drives you forward will be based around these top 3 values. So when you set goals for your life, they must be in harmony with your true heart's values. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself getting lost again. And believe me, I know, I spent a lifetime getting lost in other people's values, enmeshed in other people's importance systems in their life and what they were told is true. And I got lost, and I would come up against walls and I would go, I cannot do it anymore. Because the thing is, when you're not in alignment with your own value system, which is a driving force, it's an energy that will help you move forward with momentum and flow and play and joy. If you're not doing that, if you're going against your own values, it's going to be draining. It's going to be exhausting. And you're going to keep hitting walls and giving up. So you can be sure that you have not developed your self-autonomy if you keep coming up against these things in your life. So I'm going to leave you with that today in this episode. That is my origin story in a nutshell. I'm going to be talking a lot more about my childhood and my teen years, my 20s and my 30s as we progress in these episodes. There's a lot more to talk about. And, you know, it's not all about the mechanisms of bulimia. It's very much about our mind, our body, and our spirit in this process. And so it's important that you get this understanding of your value system in place, because you must know thyself, body, mind, and spirit, and that's individual. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please feel free to write comments underneath with any questions in capital letters that you might want to ask me that I can address in a future episode. I would love to be able to address what each of you want to hear. If you are struggling with bulimia, you can be completely or not anonymous, and just ask on behalf of someone else if you like. And, you know, stay tuned for the next episode and I will be able to address these things for you. So I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Please like, subscribe, and share if this is something that is going to help and encourage you to find health, healing, and integration. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.